Welcome to Ask Psych Sessions with Marianne Lloyd, where we ask some of the best teachers we know questions from you, our audience. If you have a question or an idea for a conversation, please visit bit.ly/Ask Psych Sessions. That's bit.ly/Ask Psych Sessions. All one word, all lowercase. And here's our next question.
Thanks for joining us today. Our guest is Christina Hawansky from St. Mary's College. I'm glad that you're with us today.
Hi, I'm so glad to be here.
So before we jump into what it's like to try to start your academic career in the middle of a pandemic, can you tell our listeners a bit about what St. Mary's College is like? What are you teaching? What's your research area? How big are your courses? A little bit of context setting, please.
Sure, of course. So I finished my PhD in social psychology at Rutgers University, and I am now just finished my third semester at St. Mary's College of Maryland, where I am an assistant professor. St. Mary's is a small liberal arts school. It is a public liberal arts school, which is one of the things that first drew me to St. Mary's, which means that we have, more diversity in the student body in terms of race, socioeconomic status than I think other public or other liberal arts colleges might have. We generally have pretty small classes. We have about a 10-to-1 student to faculty ratio. In my classes, I teach social psychology. I also teach our stats methods sequence. So those courses are usually, between 20 students and 10 students. So I have a chance to get to know my students really well, which I really love. And then this winter, I am actually teaching a new course called The Psychology of Sharks, which I am very excited about. Generally, my research focuses on biases in visual processes and cognition, with a focus on trying to understand how biased visual perception and visual attention, as well as biases in the way that we think, can contribute to stigmatization and marginalization, with an emphasis on trying to understand discrimination towards the LGBTQ plus community.
Great. Well, then why don't we maybe just jump right in on that last part, talking about stigma with the LGBTQ plus community. Sort of what do you then do in your courses to work on this? To make your classrooms maybe more welcoming and more inclusive? Do you have some kind of best practices to give to our listeners?
Sure. Yeah, of course. So one thing that I, do care deeply about trying to create equity within the classroom, and my colleagues, Melanie Maiman and Diana Sanchez, and I have a paper that is being under revision right now that is looking at how identity safety cues can signal identity safety for students within the classroom. And in this work, we actually had, 2 large lecture courses. And in one of those courses, we integrated a variety of safety cues. And these are things that we hope to signal that identities are respected and valued, that all identities are respected and valued within the classroom. And in this work, and I integrate this in my own teaching as well, we really focused on a couple of domains. So one was what visual cues are present. And I think this is really important because, as we are in a pandemic right now, I think there is a lot of opportunity as students are watching lectures online to integrate these visual cues maybe differently than they would be in a classroom. So things like, what pictures do you have on your slides? Are you representing individuals with diverse gender identities, with sexual orientations? What are the different visuals you have on your slides that you talk about? What are the different names that you use when you are going through on your exams, things like that. And also it provides a really unique opportunity to provide some other cues in terms of equity. So for example, doing little things that can, as we find in the work, have big consequences, but like providing my pronouns in my Zoom name, so students can see this. And what we found in this work is that by implementing some of these cues, things like a non-discrimination policy, other inclusive imagery, as I mentioned, that really was associated with higher senses of belonging in the classroom, Students felt like their professor valued equity more. They felt that they belonged more in the classroom. That was associated with feeling a higher sense of belonging in the field of psychology more broadly. And so I think that these cues that signal that students are valued in the classroom, that their identities are valued, is something really important. And I think a lot of this stuff translates to even when we're teaching during a pandemic, which has been quite a challenge. But fortunately, I do feel like I was able to integrate some of those cues into my teaching this semester.
Great. Thank you. Those are helpful, practical tips. And maybe I can just sort of follow up as someone that doesn't have very many identities within a marginalized group. One thing that I think might make me nervous as I try to sort of do the exam stuff and things like that is to worry that I might look like I'm tokening instead of it looking like genuine inclusivity. So would you kind of how I might deal with that is I probably would just be direct in class and say, here's something I'm trying to work on. I read a paper that says that, if you only use white names in your exam questions, that's not very inclusive. So I'm going to try to use names that come from a variety of backgrounds as an attempt to show that I'm paying attention. Is that helpful? Not helpful? It depends on the class. It depends on your personality. I know there's probably no one right answer, but maybe for those of us that are concerned about as a straight white lady kind of coming off and also not wanting to necessarily stereotype either. Right. So, if I want to have pictures of same-sex couples, I, maybe want to make sure that I don't just do them in what people might, in their you're the social psychologist. You can explain to me how this works. But right. I would think that, people might have a stereotype gay or lesbian couple image, but that's not the only way that our LGBTQ plus students and family and human beings exist. So do you mind talking about that for a little as well?
Absolutely. I think that's such a great, important question. Especially, my colleague, a friend of mine, Lee Wilton, has a really great paper out about perceptions of diversity dishonesty. That, organizations who try to signal diversity and inclusion and valuing this multicultural approach, but then who don't follow it up with actions can actually have, worse consequences than if they had just done nothing at all. And so it's not enough to just walk the walk. You got to talk the talk. And I think a huge part of that does come from acknowledging where, our own backgrounds lie. So also as a white lady myself, I always start my classes acknowledging that, and talking to students about, hey, we're coming into this space with different identities, different experiences, different perspectives, different privileges, and here are what mine are. And so know that I'm coming into the space with that baggage and with those identities. And I'm going to do my best to create a context where I do value your identities, and I'm going to try to create an environment where I can show you that. And so I do think the more that we can be honest and open with our students, the better. I want to recognize that, of course, that is in of itself is privilege that I'm able to go into a classroom space and say that, and that other folks may not be able to in a safe way for their careers or for even a physically safe way to go out and list off their identities in a classroom. But I do think it's important to recognize our own limitations, and as we discuss equity issues of our own perspectives is really important.
Thank you. And I think maybe that's a good way to sort of transition into how all of this then kind of plays out once we're in a pandemic, where you're trying to do this teaching in a way that I think most of us weren't. I guess some people might have been trained for all asynchronous online teaching or something, but I think a lot of us are in a newer space than we used to be. So you, it sounds like, had a semester, I'm guessing in person, fall, your first semester, and then partway through spring, switched out, and then whatever is happening right now, and then the sharks, which I would like to hear a little more about the shark thing, if we have time at the end, and now whatever's happening for spring. So kind of from your perspective, what are some things that faculty can be doing for their newer colleagues to help make this go as well as it can? It's already stressful enough to be on the tenure track, and then throwing in this curveball is a whole nother thing. So if you'd like to talk about things that are going well or suggestions, please.
Absolutely. So I think just for some context, we, like many other places, had to do a very quick pivot in the spring to, doing full in-person instructions, to quickly go online. Then this fall, St. Mary's College is doing sort of a hybrid approach. Some faculty are teaching in person, some faculty are teaching remotely. And then students have the option to either go to the classroom or to Zoom in either from their dorms or from wherever they are. And so we have sort of this factorial design of all these different combinations of how students are learning this semester. And so it certainly has been a challenge, but I do think, there are some things that I found helpful as I've sort of learned this semester. So these are things that I didn't necessarily do right off the bat, but stuff that I've sort of picked up or borrowed from my phenomenal colleagues here. And I think, one thing that we talk a lot about as a psychology department here at St. Mary's College is this idea of radical empathy. And that's a word that we sort of is our mantra, I think, as a department. And that's been something that's been incredibly important this semester. The idea that, we know as faculty that we are struggling. I mean, maybe I'm speaking for myself. Like, I am struggling. They don't feel like they have time for anything. Mental health is tough to try to stay positive and engaged and focused in this like really long, drawn out stressor that has really integrated itself into all parts of our lives. And so I have to keep reminding myself as I'm thinking about how am I designing my courses, how am I assessing my students, how can I integrate empathy into this classroom, and also for myself as well. And so some things that I think have worked well this semester are thinking about the ways in which I can, we talk about universal design a lot, right? But thinking about the ways that I can try to create a classroom context where no matter how students learn or what environment they're learning in, that there's an opportunity for them to get the work done and practically turn things in and be assessed so that they can sort of move forward with their classes and move forward in their careers. And a lot of that differs depending on what class I'm teaching. And so for social psychology, for example, the students don't need to leave social psychology knowing everything about social psychology, right? So it's about, I want them to have a broad understanding of social context and be able to leave with like a couple of like key take homes, but them knowing social psychology is not going to make or break the rest of their time at St. Mary's or in their careers. They can always take more social psychology courses later in the curriculum. So I can be more flexible there. Whereas with stats and methods, the students have to learn that content, because if they don't learn, if they can't do a t-test, or if they can't do, talk about different types of validity, then that's something that's going to be problematic for them as they move forward in the curriculum into their lab courses, into their honors projects, into graduate school. And so trying to adjust the flexibility depending on the course has been a challenge. But one thing that I've done sort of across the board is giving students the option to attend class synchronously or asynchronously. And so doing things like really encouraging students to come to class live, which most of them do, but then recording the classes. And so students have the opportunity to watch the recordings back, but with the caveat of they can sort of erase that absence if they go through and send me, an email answering all of the questions that I asked in lecture. So it sort of has some accountability to it. But this has been really helpful for students who are taking care of loved ones and aren't able to, be there at the exact time every single day, or students who have had to pick up a job, or students who have other challenges that come up, and maybe they just need a day. Like, things are really hard right now, and maybe they just need the day to just rest and recoup. And so this has been something that I think students have found useful, and I do have probably about a third of my students utilizing this option fairly frequently. Things like having really flexible deadlines. So letting students, as long as I, not asking for justification for deadlines, saying, I recognize that life is hard right now. I often say that like this semester is not a regular semester by any stretch. And so trying to be really flexible with deadlines, trying to, not asking for doctor's notes, not asking for proof of something, and also, reminding students, again, with this radical empathy idea of like, their health comes first. At the end of the day, it's heartbreaking to see messages from students who are saying, hey, my parents both have COVID and I'm at home taking care of them. I'm so sorry that I'm not able to come to class today. It's like, it's okay. It's okay. Your parents' health is so much more important than, learning about attitudes today. Like, you can learn about attitudes tomorrow. Today, take care of your family. And so trying to constantly, even though I lose patience sometimes, because I'm human, but constantly reminding myself that, students are humans, believe it or not. And like, we all need empathy this semester. And so really reminding myself of that. And also doing things like I've noticed in my classes that in the chat room, in the Zoom chat rooms, the students were sort of occasionally like inappropriately, they just seemed like they were in a really dark place during lectures, and they would sort of, have dark humor. And I love gallows humor, don't get me wrong, but it sort of seemed like it was distracting from class. And so one thing that I learned is, I asked the students, what do you need? Like, what can I do? And they said that they felt like they just didn't have a place to talk about how bad things were. So we started each class with, tell me all the things that are terrible right now. And so I've been using Poll Everywhere a lot. That's been a really good tool. And so sort of just opening up a Poll Everywhere, tell me everything that's terrible right now. And then they would just, dump that all into the Poll Everywhere. And we sort of would go through and we would talk about some things and say, hey, okay, you're all really stressed out about the election today. What are you stressed out about? Do you want to talk about it? Do you have any questions? Okay, you're all really stressed out because whatever, okay, so some of you're doing interviews for jobs. Like, let's talk about that. And so just giving them a moment, taking 5 minutes at the beginning of class to let them get it all out of their systems and to have a space where we can kind of just recognize how tough things are right now. And then we sort of left that at the door, and then we could proceed into class with that off of their plate. And so I agreed to do this with them. This is something they asked for, with the stipulation that we ended class on, now tell me some things that are awesome right now. And it could be something as little as you have a amazing cup of coffee, or it's not raining, or whatever, but just tell me something that's good. And so they were able to sort of come into class, have a safe space where they can talk about what was going wrong, and then leave class with at least a slightly more positive mindset. And I think that's something that helped this semester. It helped us sort of recognize that this is not normal. And so I plan on doing that again next semester as well.
What a great exercise, and sounds very helpful. And my curiosity question is, do you also report the things that are wrong and great, or are you so I guess, I haven't taught methods, that chapter for a few semesters now, but the, acknowledged observer, obviously you are, or do you become an acknowledged participant in the room?
Oh, I'm always a participant in my classes. And so as I mentioned earlier, I think honesty and vulnerability is so important. I think that the more that, and of course, it's emotionally difficult, but I find that the more I am genuinely myself with my students, the more they'll be themselves with me. And so I absolutely participate in things that are stressful right now. So my dog just ripped up my carpet this morning and I don't know what I'm going to do about that, or, things like that for sure. I definitely participate with it. And I found it is cathartic as well. It's nice to say, yeah, everything is trash. Life is really hard right now, but at the end of the day, we can try to find some positivity in some way. And I think that goes a long way.
And then just one more question on that. For the students that use the recordings, do they also, do you encourage them to also participate in this as part of their way of, processing having not been in class, or you sort of start your recording after this part and stop it before that?
It just sort of depends on how awake I am. Usually I try to start the recording right away. But, sometimes I would start once we got into the lecture. It also, to be honest, depended on the day. So, for example, if we were talking about heavy topics, right? So, we talk often about the 2 or 3 weeks that we spend on stereotyping and prejudice. And so to give them the space to respond about what's terrible and what they're stressed out about without it being recorded. So trying to be mindful of when to record and when not to. But, I do ask the students who participate asynchronously to respond to all the questions. And so even if I started the recording a little bit late, they sort of know that that's the routine. And so they will often start their emails with, hey, Dr. Hwansky, here's 3 things that are terrible in my life right now. And then here are my answers to the rest of the class questions, but here's something I'm excited about. And so they sort of even intuitively just in the routine, we're doing that as well, which is really helpful to get to know, as an instructor, especially fortunately because my classes are small enough, I'm able to have an idea of what is going on in their lives, and it provides some context to knowing, hey, I have a group of students who are all stressed out about the same thing. So maybe this means this week I need to take things back a step, right? And so it was helpful in just providing some context to where they were coming from at the beginning of that lecture.
Great, thank you. That does sound, I don't know, maybe I will take a little taste of that for my class as well, because like you, I enjoy getting to know them, and I teach research methods a lot, which they don't really come skipping in the room for that one. So I think this could really help with building a strong classroom community. Maybe if you are up for it, can you give us the 30-second version of the sharks class? What is the psychology of sharks class about?
Oh my gosh. So this class originally started because Dr. Erin Westgate, who's a social psychologist down in Florida, posted something on Twitter as a joke. So she just said, oh, hey, I love, she loves sharks, and was like, I'm just going to, here's a bunch of readings that I would be interested in doing about sharks. If I were to teach a Psych of Sharks class, here are a couple of articles that I think I would want to teach in that class. And so a friend had sent that to me. As an undergraduate, I got my undergraduate degree at Rollins College as a double major in marine biology and psychology. And, you could take the girl out of marine biology, but you can't take the marine biology out of the girl. And so I was like, oh gosh, I wish I could do something marine biology related. And then I saw that, Erin's wonderful tweet and, started drumming my fingers together and was like, And I think part of the semester in this empathy approach is trying to find what brings you joy. And I was like, what would bring me joy this semester is prepping a psychology of sharks class. And so this is a class that we are teaching. I am teaching this winter. It shockingly, I didn't think anyone would take it, but it actually has been incredibly popular. So the class is really filled up quite quickly. In this class, we are going to focus on all aspects of shark psychology. So we are going to spend the first bit of each class learning about shark cognition, shark memory, shark relationships. So what does shark dating look like? What do shark friendships look like? We're going to be pulling in the social psychology of fear of sharks. So where does that fear originate? What are the cognitive biases that play a role in maintaining that fear? And then the second half of the course, we're going to do some activism. And so hoping that students will, choose an issue that affects sharks. So things like bycatch or hunting or habitat loss, and just teach the class a little bit about it. The students will be teaching us about it, and then doing some sort of social activism activity. So some sort of project for the day that we're going to do each class to try to address these issues in some way. And we will be watching Jaws on the first day of class. And I'm so excited about it. I read a really great paper called Do Sharks Affect Presidential Elections? No, they don't. That's the answer. But it was a published peer-reviewed paper. And I'm so excited to learn more about sharks and teach this super fun class.
I agree. That sounds incredibly fun. And what a great way to be able to bring your background holistically into the classroom. I'm thrilled to hear that people are signing up. Thank you so much for your time today. I think this was very helpful, whether people decide, hopefully they'll decide to take a little piece of all of it, right? Bringing some of the science of your interest in, but also, using those safety cues to help students feel included and also remembering that these are whole people in our classes and making space for that. So thank you for giving us so much to work with today, Christina, and take care.
Thank you so much.